Hello everyone, welcome to a topic that's definitely been on my mind over the past few days, especially in the wake of my controversial-ish R-Type Final 2 review. And whether or not you agree with what I said in that video, whether you think R-Type Final 2 really is the return of R-Type and that it does live up to the franchise and that it does deliver on what it was supposed to deliver, and it is comparable in quality to stuff like R-Type or R-Type Leo, or like myself, you feel that it was a worthy attempt, an honorable attempt, as I say in my review, but in the end falls short in many areas, especially in terms of game design, level design, enemy design, boss design, music, graphics, just a lot of things that I had problems with. Whether or not you feel one way or another about that game, and I'm sure I'll hear what people think already, but whether or not you feel one way about that game, what I want to talk about in this video is actually more about the response to my review, response to negative reviews that I often see, and the overall climate of doing reviews in the year 2021, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions, and I think there is a growing momentum towards uniformity that I think is very concerning, and yet I don't see anyone trying to slow it down or stop it, and it feels like the stronger it grows, the bigger that avalanche becomes, the easier it just wipes out anyone who may speak against it in its wake. So hopefully in this video I can better present what my thoughts are, what my approach is, what my motivations are, because I think a lot of people sort of impute more malicious motivations onto me or make pretty wild assumptions about where I'm coming from, and also just my overall perspective on game reviews. And maybe whether or not in the end you agree with me on my reviews or not, you can at least respect where I come from, and also maybe be a bit more open-minded to other reviewers that do negative reviews that you don't agree with or you don't initially agree with, and you can give them a little bit more of a benefit of the doubt rather than immediately casting them as wicked grifters out for attention or something like that. So let's begin with the most common misconception that I've run up against. I've seen this in many reviews that I've done, in the comments section, in feedback, and also in feedback for other negative reviews that I've seen on YouTube, which is the sort of underlying idea that doing negative reviews is a really smart and clever way to get attention as a YouTuber. So let's say you're a nobody YouTuber like myself. I think that was one of the criticisms I got, is I'm just some nobody, and so my way to fame is to come out there and besmirch the fine name of R-Type Final 2. And the reason that I think people think this is because they project a sort of scenario, I guess like in grade school, where, you know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease or something. So the idea is that there's a game that comes out, a lot of people really like it, everyone's sort of grouping together in unison, they're holding hands, they're singing Kumbaya, they're saying yes, 10 out of 10. Metal Gear Solid 4, 10 out of 10. Metal Gear Solid 5, 10 out of 10. Breath of the Wild, 10 out of 10. Everyone's just, yes, we all agree this is a 10 out of 10, this is a perfect game, there's no issues, there's no flaws. And then, you know, there's a few people who come along and say, well, maybe it's an 8 out of 10, maybe it's a 7 out of 10, maybe it's not even that great at all, maybe it's a 6 out of 10. And those people are out there not because they actually believe this, not because they have some sort of perhaps worthwhile motivation for putting out this controversial review, but rather they want attention and they want it fast. And the problem is, of course, there are people who are kind of like this, but I think it's pretty easy to distinguish who do this strictly for attention, who do this for other reasons. So I want to talk about what it is actually like to put out a negative review that most people disagree with, because when you're in the eye of the storm, it feels actually a lot different than people realize. And this is why I think less and less people do negative reviews, or less and less people do unique or controversial reviews, because when you're in the heart of it, when you're under the dog pile and everyone's stomping on your head, it is not a fun time. It doesn't feel like you're winning fame and fortune and fans. It feels like you're turning what could have been your fan base or potential fan base, and you're turning them against you, and that this opinion is going to be like a black mark on your record going into the future. Like when you apply for a job, they look at your record and they're like, oh man, we were gonna hire you, but that R-Type Final 2 review, man, I mean, everyone else agreed, everyone else thought it was a great game, you know, and you didn't recommend it. I think what people don't realize is that the smart way, so let's say you're being purely calculated, you're being purely Machiavellian, 100% strategic about your reviews and getting attention and getting a fan base. How do you go about doing that? Is the way of doing this going out there and doing a bunch of negative reviews of critically acclaimed games and then getting a lot of this sort of anti fan base that sort of hang around and you all go around and troll stuff? maybe some people can pull that off, but actually what happens a lot more is that doing negative reviews is not that helpful towards your overall exposure. It can get you dropped, it can get you fired, it can get people to unsubscribe from your channel. And people, from what I've seen watching the analytics, don't necessarily just sign up for your Patreon and sign up for, you know, becoming the more dedicated fans based off negative reviews. That's actually pretty uncommon. What happens much more commonly is you do a sort of really robust appraisal. You talk about how wonderful this game is, how great it is, and you just gush and say all these great things, and I have nothing against doing that. There's some games where I do that with. But if you, as far as getting good attention and getting people to support your channel, that is the much stronger way to do it. That much more often turns into people becoming patrons, turns into people becoming subscribers. People like that. That is much more widely accepted rather than you coming out and bashing a game that people like. Another thing that people don't really realize when it comes to doing positive reviews, and you'll see this a lot of time, is that when you do a negative review, it's like you have an extra burden upon you that you don't have when you do positive reviews. When you do negative reviews, every word out of your mouth is highly scrutinized, and people sort of look through everything you say and they're looking for that gotcha, because they want to basically disprove what you have to say at all costs. On the other side, that doesn't happen with positive reviews. So let's say you come out and you do a positive review and you say something that may be a little bit off, and maybe a little bit inaccurate, or maybe not quite in line with what people think. People will much more often just let that go and say, that's all right, it's a positive review. And what's really funny is sometimes you can come out and you can do a ton of criticism of a game. You can say a lot of negative things about a game, but as long as at the end you give it a good score, or as long at the end you say, no, I recommend it, people will forgive all of that and they'll be like, okay, yeah, we're in a safe place here. This is a relief. Okay, so we all agree we buy the game. We all agree this game is great. Now we're safe enough to talk about the flaws of the game. But when you come out and say, this game has a lot of flaws, I don't feel comfortable recommending this game, then it becomes this sort of counter innocent till proven guilty sort of thing. And it's really interesting because more people would prefer you to give a bad game a positive review rather than the reverse of giving a good game a negative review. And what's interesting is at the end of the day, you have to sort of sit down as a reviewer and ask yourself, who are you more loyal to? Are you more loyal to your fans? Or are you more loyal to the game publishers, game developers? And what's weird is there's this sort of perverse thing where the fans are actually more loyal to the companies than I am a lot of the time. For example, with this R-Type Final 2 and Grizilla, I've had people comment and say, listen, you doing this negative review is not good because it undermines the sales of this studio's game. It may persuade people not to buy the game. This is an issue for the publisher. And this is not a publisher sending me this message. This isn't a representative of Grandzilla or whatever, however you pronounce the studio's name, sending me this message. This is a fan sending me this message. And why is that? I think it's because a lot of gamers like to sort of empathize and project onto the companies and feel like, yes, I am part of this company. I am not only a consumer of the company, I'm actually like part of this company's crew. And this is where the poison of fandom comes in, because I think it allows these companies to get away with a lot more than they should. And it also puts people who may try and control or critique, be an advocate on perhaps on the side of the gamers. It puts them in this awful catch-22 I was talking about, where I'm actually trying to help my audience. That's the goal. My concern is when I do my review of R-Type Final 2 and I sit down, I tally up the criticism, I tally up my feeling, and I decide, do I recommend the game or not? In my brain, I'm not sitting there thinking about, oh, those poor developers, you know, if I don't recommend the game, they may miss out on sales, and then if they miss out on sales, they might not make a sequel, they might not be able to live out their dreams, and the world would be deprived of all these amazing games if I just gave them a second chance. No, that is some real, like, I don't know, it feels like you're being a corporate lapdog, in my opinion, if you're doing that. Even if it's an indie studio, it doesn't feel like you have the best interest of your viewers at heart. For me, the bottom line is always I sit down and I put myself in the seat of a viewer of mine and I say, okay, Mark recommended this game. I go out, I spend $40 on the game, and then I feel like there's a lot of issues with this game that Mark skipped over. There's a lot of problems with this game that Mark didn't address. There's a lot of quality things that in the past he said he cares about. In the past he said these matter, these are important, and yet here he is letting them skate by. Here he is contradicting himself and recommending a game that does not live up to these expectations. And so I always put myself in that seat as far as you watching me, whether or not to spend money or not. $40 for a full price game is a lot of money to spend. And while I try not to let prices factor into my analysis too much, because I think that's stupid in some degrees, because it gets that's a whole nother topic, but it gets really muddy if you do that, because then you could always say, well, as long as you wait 12 years for the game to go on sale, it's a recommend, so everything's a recommend. And I think that's a sort of cheat code reviewers do to get around actually putting out a real review, is they'll just say, well, it's not that great, but it's still a recommend if you just wait for it to go on sale. It's like, well, yeah, if it's $4, I mean, how bad does it need to be not to recommend it at that point? But I'm getting sidetracked. But that is the perspective I have when I'm doing these negative reviews. It's you, the gamer. I'm thinking about the audience. I'm not thinking about the studios. I'm not thinking about the Kickstarter. I'm thinking about you spending that money, because I believe if the game's quality, people will buy it. Whether or not I say it's good or not, the game is quality, and the quality is undeniable. My negative review would not stop that from happening. And it's kind of a sick world we live in, and I think this is intentionally set up by stuff like Metacritic and stuff like the publishing studios, where they put the burden of worrying about the finances of the studio on the fans. That is weird and bizarre and perverse. Imagine if you had to do that with everything. So you go to a restaurant, they serve you a crap meal. Maybe it wasn't awful, but it wasn't good. And you look at your friends and you're like, listen, I didn't enjoy this meal at all. I didn't think it was very good. It was undercooked. It didn't deliver what it was supposed to deliver. It wasn't as advertised. But I'm really worried about how the restaurant owner is going to get by next month. So we're going to have to come here. We're going to have to recommend this restaurant to all our friends. They're all going to have to come here and eat. Not because its quality is irresistible, but because, you know, maybe the chef will get his stuff together. I mean, maybe he'll go back to school. He'll learn how to, you know, saute some onions. He'll learn that stuff. We just need to give him a chance. So let's all just recommend this to everyone. Let's give it a good review, because giving it a bad review would be mean. It would be, you see what I'm saying? We don't do this with other aspects of our life. We can be absolutely cutthroat with things like food, with things like regular consumer product. But with video games, we have this sort of special soft spot for them where we empathize with them in a kind of interesting way. But for me, I don't want to do that. That's not how I am. And so I would much rather put out a review that on my side leans a little bit more on the cautionary side towards buying if I'm undecided. In the case of R-Type Final 2, I didn't feel all that conflicted. I personally regret buying the game, but I don't because I'm a YouTuber. But if I just bought it to play it, I would deeply regret that $40 spent, because that's the $4 I could have put towards a lot of other stuff that I felt would be much more worthwhile. So that's my perspective when I do these reviews, when I do criticisms and things like that. It isn't me trying to be some hipster out there like, oh, look at me, I'm so smart. It's not like that, because the thing about it is, if you're just trying to be popular, if you're just trying to be liked, it is actually very hard in this climate to put out negative reviews. It is actually not fun. I say that directly in the video. I am not having fun doing this. I know it's not going to be popular. I know it's not going to be well regarded. And again, the way it skews is the people who appreciate your negative review, they'll say, yeah, I agree. It's not worth it. That, and move on with their life. They're dispassionate. They're disinterested. They have other things they want to buy. They don't care that much. The people who care are the people who are deeply invested in liking this game, and they will come at you tooth and nail. And it won't just be your criticisms. They'll come attack you personally. They'll find whatever they can do. It's like a political campaign. They'll go after whatever they can find. They'll dig up dirt wherever they can to discredit you. They'll say you don't know how to play the genre. They don't really look back through your history of other reviews. It's just not a totally healthy system. And you think this is just me exaggerating. I did a negative review of these Psycho ports on Switch, and El Capitan gets the boot, you know, from Nintendo Life. Well, let's just get to the heart of it. Here's the winning combination of gaming journalism, and people also took issue with me criticizing gaming journalists like Eurogamer and all these places. I have some bad news for you all. I'm going to continue to be pretty critical of these places because I do not think there's anything that they do that is remotely journalism, and I think it is honestly ridiculous that they even give themselves those titles. They should call themselves gaming magazines, gaming websites. They cannot have that title journalist, because a great example of this, to get very specific, is the R-Type Final 2 press. Look at some of these articles written about R-Type Final 2 when the Kickstarter is announced. And now we get to my favorite section here, the Kickstarter, and why I really, really dislike Kickstarters in most cases, especially for recognizable stuff like R-Type, like Shenmue, like Mega Man. Those types of things I really dislike Kickstarters for. I personally am much more positive towards Kickstarters for like brand new IPs where, you know, we're all just kind of sitting back and waiting, like, is this going to be good? Is this not going to be good? I guess we'll see. They're more scrutinized. They don't have this sort of nice nostalgic blanket they can throw over themselves and protect themselves from criticism. So you look at some of these articles written about R-Type Final 2 that are coming out during the Kickstarter, and if you're a journalist, you'd assume part of being a journalist is doing some investigation, to do some questioning. But you look at these, and these are all softball marketing fluff pieces. 100%, whether you agree with them or not, they are 100% softball marketing fluff pieces. They are never asking the developers who are running the Kickstarter, who are campaigning for money from fans, any difficult question. For instance, a good question could have been for this guy: listen, among many R-Type fans, your R-Type Final 1, the one you directed, is considered the weakest in the series, and is considered not as strong as stuff like the original R-Type. What are you going to do in this new follow-up to address those criticisms? What are you going to do to address the criticisms of R-Type Final 1? It's just the branding of it is so misleading, in my opinion, where you read the title, it says like, R-Type is returning, the franchise is finally coming back, and it just puts these expectations that I don't think are fair. And what I have a real problem with Kickstarter is that Kickstarter is not like other things. It's like basically almost the worst investing prospect ever, where a game developer wants to make a game. Traditionally, what they need to do is they need to find investors. Investors give them the money, but the investors get paid in return, right? They invest in the game. So if the game flops, the investors lose. If the game succeeds, the investors win. So the investors are much more careful. They're much more calculated. You're going to have to prove yourself to these investors, which can go one of two ways. Sometimes it can prevent great games from being made. Other times it can prevent bad games from getting made. We tend to forget about that. But the thing about Kickstarter that I do not like is that Kickstarter makes the consumer the investor, but with none of the benefit. So basically you take all the risk, but you get none of the return, because at the end of the day, you either get nothing. Let's say they just cancel the project, you get nothing, or they deliver a subpar game like a Mighty No. 9. And I know some people apparently think Mighty No. 9 was a great follow-up or something, but my eyes, I looked on that and followed it very closely. I was very interested in it. It was the first Kickstarter project I was very excited for, and it turned out so well, did it? But anyway, it's the people who are left with the bag. But the problem that I'm getting to here is when it comes to reviewing Kickstarter games, you're not reviewing games for fans anymore. You're not reviewing games for people who are trying to decide, do I buy the game or not buy the game? You are reviewing for the game for people who already bought the game. And so there's this extra incentive for them to be mad at for negative reviews. So look at Kickstarters. Whenever there's a Kickstarter and people do a negative review, you're gonna get a big fat backlash from the backers, because the backers literally invested in the game. So they're not gonna just undo their investment. Some people will, some people are level-headed like that, but a lot of people aren't, and they're gonna have this very emotional reaction to what you say. And you can say, no, Mark, you're exaggerating. I've read some of the comments. I mean, some of them are just straight up yelling at you and saying nasty things about you. There's nothing even substantial about what they say as far as addressing your criticism. And so this is the environment that we live in, and the reason why I made this video is I want people just to take a step back and think about, okay, next time you see a negative review, The next time you assume that the negative review is just a bad review because you don't agree with it, that's another thing too, is we've sort of made this new expectation that as long as you like it, it's good, which I don't think is fair. There's a lot of games that I love that I know aren't good, like the Sailor Moon beat 'em up. I think that's a fun, awesome game. Can I, in any world, sit down and give that game like a high review score and say, yeah, it's great? No, it's completely broken. There's a lot of issues with it. You have to play it in sort of a weird way to even enjoy it, but I liked it. But that doesn't make it a great game. And I think that's the problem people have when it comes to reviews too, is you're trying to be a little bit more objective. You're trying to be a little bit more generalized to the people viewing in. So this whole thought of, well, if you don't enjoy it, it's just because you're playing it wrong. That doesn't hold up forever. I remember, for instance, someone said in criticism of my review of R-Type Final 2, well, the reason you don't like it is because you don't know how to use the ball mechanic. You don't understand the mechanics of the game. You're not using the ball in the footage here. You're not engaging, playing in a high-level way in the footage. Therefore, you don't understand the game and your review is invalid. But in my review, I say the contrary. In my review, I say, listen, the problem with the game is that the level design is too passive. It's not too hard. If I said it was too hard and it was beating me down and I can't do it, then that would make sense. But my criticism was backwards. My criticism was, the game is too passive. The game doesn't push me. The game doesn't force me to do anything. It never forces me to use the ball, so why should I use the ball? If I can get away with just sitting in the middle of the screen and firing, why shouldn't I? I feel like when it comes to game design, especially shmup, you have to force the player. You have to push their hand. If you don't do that, you're not making an engaging experience. And it's not the player's responsibility to artificially come up with some sort of gameplay meta for you. You can argue that, and some people can enjoy that, but that's not the standard I go off of. For example, fire up some Ketsui, play stage 1 and hold the fire button. See how long you live. See how long the game lets you get away with that. I think when I look at game design and level design, what I'm looking for is activity, is for engagement. The game must push you. Same thing with the boss fights. People said, Mark, in your footage, you're just sitting there shooting the boss. You're not fighting the boss correctly. Therefore, your review is invalid. That's the exact point I'm making. The point I'm making is that the boss is designed in a way that is flawed. If you can sit there and just shoot the boss without having to do anything, without having to engage it and time it out, that's a design overlook. That's overlooking the game design. That's not me, the player, not understanding the game design. You know what I'm saying? There needs to be an authorial hand in the level design that forces the player to move. Again, fire up Batrider, play the boss rush mode in Batrider, stand still and fire at a boss in Batrider, see how long you live. It'll be about 3 seconds before you're dead. That is good boss design. Boss design that forces you to move, that forces you to fight. And this is something that the game just doesn't do in a lot of cases. And then another follow-up to that was people were saying, well, you're only playing on normal difficulty. If you played on the higher difficulties, then that criticism wouldn't apply anymore. But again, that's not good game design either, because the idea of normal difficulty is that is the default difficulty. I intentionally review all my games in normal difficulty because otherwise, yeah, I can review games in hard mode, and I play games in hard mode. I love hard mode. And if the game has a strong normal difficulty, I will discuss the hard mode. But you can't just remove aspects of the game design in normal difficulty and say it's all good because you can just play it in harder mode. That's not how it works. So for instance, let's say you want to make the game easier. What you would do is you would give the player some tools, you'd give the player some interactivity still. You wouldn't just remove enemies from the level. Like, can an easy mode be just remove all the enemies and leave a boss at the end? There's your easy mode? No, you need to put things in, and games have done this before, like Crimson Clover World Explosion has a fantastic easy mode where they do slow down the bullets, they reduce the enemy count, but at the same time, it still forces you to move around the screen. You can't just sit there. Same thing with Dodonpachi Resurrection or Dodonpachi DFK, however you want to say it. They give you an auto bomb system. They give you really healthy amount of bombs to engage with. They give you forgivability, but they're not taking away gameplay where you're just sitting there waiting around. That's the problem with the normal mode, and that is the mode that most people are going to play, especially people picking up the series for the first time. So again, there's just a lot of things that I wish people would think about where I'm coming from first before immediately just trying to throw away my review because they don't agree with me. And even if you don't agree with me, that's fine. But I just think that this whole hive mind mentality we have of the collective says it's good, therefore good. If not, then you are wrong type of thing, that we all need to just fall into this collective. What I'm saying is a lot of people may not necessarily all think the game is that great, is wonderful, but they're not going to really stand out and say that and put out this negative review, because the backlash and the consequences are not a fun time. I sat down and seriously considered, do I even do negative reviews anymore? Maybe I should just skip these games next time around. So if they make Gradius Resurrection Never Die Delta, maybe I'll just skip that review if it's not good. You know, maybe I'll play the game. If it's good, I'll do a review. If it's not good, I'll skip the review. I think a lot of people do this. A lot of channels have exclusively positive reviews, and if they don't like the game, they just omit the review. That's a sort of meta strategy around it. But at the same time, I just think that the importance of having negative reviews is that you're not being sort of misled into thinking there's a consensus that doesn't exist. And that's something I don't think is very healthy, because let's say you read all these reviews, R-Type Final 2 is the best thing ever, it's the greatest shmup ever. You play it, and you, like myself, you're someone like me coming into the genre, and you play it and you're like, I don't like this game. I don't like it. And then everyone in the world saying, no, this is a great game, this is a fantastic game. Your assumption is then, oh, okay, shmups just suck. It's just a stupid genre. I don't like this genre. I want a genre that's more interesting and fun, and this is a little bit boring and bland. And then you think like R-Type Final 2 is like the prima crop of what the genre has to offer, when it isn't. And so that's why I think negative reviews are so important, because you need to actually be able to tell people that no, there can be better. This isn't representative of the entire genre. So anyway, I'm sure this video itself would be very controversial, but I think it's important to get this stuff out there. And I'd like to end by thanking my patrons and thanking the people who, even if you didn't agree with me fully, you weren't totally closed-minded and yelling at me and unsubscribing and whatever, bashing and attacking me personally. I appreciate that a lot. Adios, everyone. So thank you to 100, 72 PCT Water, Adam Pearson, Ukshay Wadker, Dingo, Andy Capped, Another Joe, Anthony A., Aaron Solis, Ben Win, Borgie22, Brian Reboot, Brian Shiver, Chris Yuzefovich, Chronic Burnout 3, Corio, Daniel Savage, Delta Tango 6, Disco Staslea, Eric H, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Geriatric Don Maku, Hausu, Ilya, Kiwi, JLab, JBRPG, Joe Angelo, John Kelly, Gameboy Guru, K, K2, Kikoman 589, Larridge, Malaise, Mark Toms, Maz, Meher Klendrian, Minong, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Neon Dagger Games, Okla Kugels, Philip Mason, Portal 63, Raul, Real Skeen, Sketchy Raccoon, SLW, The Boot Rex, The Real Ikuzo, TRM, Sugumo, Yishi, Plasmo, and Utsukaya. Thanks for watching.